Hey, I'm Torben, and this is a channel about books. Today I'm talking about a book called Lives of Girls and Women by Alice Munro. Um, Here it is. Um, so it's a book, it's a Canadian book, and I don't think you should call authors by their nationality necessarily. I just think that it's sort of not the most important thing about an author, but it is kind of relevant for this book because Canada factors very prominently into the narrative. She's a very Munro's kind of like a very Canada first author. Um, there are some people call her style like Southern Ontario Gothic, which is kind of silly, but if you know Canada, you'll know that Southern Ontario is pretty much where all of English speaking Canada lives. So it's like our major population center, aside from Montreal area and Vancouver area. It's the biggest population center. So it sort of does it is somewhat emblematic of Canadian life. And so Munro does sort of really capture something about Canada by writing about Southern Ontario, and because her style reminds people of Flannery O'Connor or William Faulkner or something like that, they call it Southern Ontario Gothic. And you do sort of see the similarities when you're reading their prose. It's very stark. She focuses on people in the countryside, not in major urban centers, sort of in small towns. And she really does do a good job of capturing small town weirdness. And so the small town weirdness that she tries to capture in this book is all set in Jubilee, Ontario, which is not a real place basically. So she's kind of fictionalized the small town probably the small town that she grew up in. There's another town which some other people online have done some digging and found that there's this small town called Wingham or Wingham, Ontario, something like that. And that's kind of probably the place that Jubilee, the town in the book, is meant to represent. So, yeah, so she, and the reason I say it's probably the town she grew up in is this story is about a girl growing up, basically. I mean, in the simplest terms, that's kind of what it's about. It starts when she's young, and it ends when she graduates from high school basically, and is kind of trying to go to university. It's set it's set in the 40s and 50s though. So, yeah. Anyways, it starts when she's 8 or 9. The Second World War is going on. Maybe she's 10. I don't know. The Second World War is going on, and she's a kid still, basically. And it takes her through her life living sort of out in the real backwoods, and then sort of moving into town. At first, they live at her father's house, and then he's a fox breeder, basically. He breeds silver foxes. They always say that he breeds silver foxes. I don't know, I think it's for their fur, their pelts or something like that. But then her and her mom move into town because her mom is sort of I'm not sure how to say it. She kind of sees herself as an intellectual. She doesn't have a very strong formal education, but she sees herself as an intellectual, and she wants to kind of be more urban. And she does leverage that urbanness once she gets there. She's always writing to the newspaper. She does op-eds basically in the small town local newspaper about random subjects like birth control, for example. She writes an op-ed about birth control, and is seen as a liberal, a super hardcore liberal, seen as a feminist, etc. But it's also Del Jordan, who's the protagonist, the girl, is embarrassed basically by her mom. Her mom is also an encyclopedia salesperson, so she goes around Jubilee, the town of Jubilee, selling encyclopedias to people, and is like, you know, like postures super hard about it. Or it's not that bad, but like she like definitely like identifies with this role of like the knowledge keeper or like the knowledge bringer in this town. And you know, the residents find it a little bit cringy, and especially Dell is like super embarrassed by it and has some conversations about it at school. So they live in town, and Dell grows up. She at first, so her first like the book is like very, it's a lot about sex and like, you know, intimacy, and what that was like for like a girl in the 50s. Obviously I don't know anything about that, so I'll like, you know, just sort of give a general explanation of how that part of the book works. First there's this like significantly older guy, like an old ass dude, who is like very inappropriate towards her, and like I'm not gonna say what happens on the YouTube channel. She doesn't get assaulted, but like he's like insanely inappropriate towards her, and it blows your mind to read this. This part of the book is like, the reason I do want to mention it is because it's like so masterfully written. You know, like it's as good as literally anything you could read. The way she like deals with the subject matter, how she renders it, is like, it just totally blows your fucking mind how good a writer she is. And she's not afraid to like deal with intense subjects. I think she wrote this book in the 70s. Like, there's, you know, she's an equally deft handler of like sexual topics than like anybody else. And this like old lecher is like very a very like frightening, bizarre character. And yeah, I mean, you know, other writers write about sex, but like Joyce didn't render sex in this much like bizarre detail, and his book was like, you know, censored, like you couldn't sell it in like the States because it was so like bawdy. And D.H. Lawrence, who was like pushing the envelope, he doesn't write about sex with this much specificity at all. Nabokov doesn't write about it like that. Obviously nobody in the 19th century. I said in my blog post that there are like some like edgy French writers who, you know, are working today, who are seen as like, who are basically doing the same thing, but like, and they're like, you know, lauded for their efforts today at like, you know, dealing frankly with a difficult subject. But Munro was just as forward looking and as aggressive in her you know, confronting of issues like this. Sorry, I think you can hear my dishwasher going in the back. But yeah, all that just to say, the French authors I'm talking about, like Virginie Despentes, and there's a woman named like Nina something. I'll put the links in the description, or I'll put the book titles in the description. These authors that I'm talking about. And yeah, so I was frankly pretty shocked when I ran across, especially this part with the old lecher, but then it goes on to talk about some like more normal boyfriends that she has, somebody who like she almost marries, and this relationship is really like weird. So it's interesting, but it's weird. So basically she's like, you know, despite her chagrin at her mother's like intellectualisms and posturing, she's still Del Jordan, quite an ambitious young woman Her mother like pushes her to like go to college. She's supposed to get these scholarships to go to like University of Toronto, U of T, or McGill or something like that, a big Canadian school. Supposed to leave the small town and go and live in the big city, but but there's this like episode before she graduates where she takes up with a skilled tradesperson in the village or the town of Jubilee. She becomes his girlfriend. They have sex. They have sex like a bunch of times, unprotected, and so she's cognizant of the fact that she like might get pregnant and it like might, totally derail her ambitious plans. Nevertheless, she is like very sort of, she approaches it in like a very desultory way. So she is kind of like resigned to this possibility, doesn't feel very concerned about it, is just like is like living kind of in this period of inertia where she is just going along with this relationship. And then there's this one scene where she's been going to church with this guy, and this guy wants to like baptize her in a river basically. So and this scene's pretty intense, but like the guy is like, oh well, we should have kids, like you should move into my mom's house, like onto my mom's farm with me. And Del Jordan, who like has no desire to have a child, is just like, yeah, sure, like I'll have a kid or whatever. It's bizarre, and it's like, I don't know, when Munro wrote that, I was like, wow, she has such a nuanced view of this character's psychology, like the fact that this person is just like wading into a major life decision in the way that somebody wades into the river without like caring, without really being concerned about where she's going. I thought that was like a very like a mature observation. It's like there's no like rational reason for that. She has like obviously a better future that's easily attainable given her existing position, and she's just like, yeah, like fuck it, like I'll just resign myself to like 60 more years in this village that I don't want to be in with a guy that I have nothing in common with, who is like a theist. I'm an atheist. But then what happens is the guy is like, okay, well, you have to like be baptized basically if you want to like have a kid with me. And she's like, no, like I don't want to. And he's like, oh, I should like baptize you in this river right here. And then it's basically like attempted murder almost. It's like he like tries to like baptize her hard, and then she has this then Del Jordan goes into this even more interesting psychological state where she like realizes that she's like kind of observing her life from outside of herself, and everything that she's doing is just like an act or a game basically. And she's like, oh yeah, like I can just like jump back into my life and like take control of the situation again. I can like insert myself into like the first person again, and actually do something about the situation I'm in. It's not inertial. It's not inertial basically. And she does, and then she's just like no, like get off me, like stop trying to baptize me basically. Get away from me. And then they part ways and they never see each other again. And then the last part of the book, this is the last thing I'll talk about. The last part of the book, which comes pretty much just after this part, is like pretty metafictional. So basically, Del Jordan is like walking around in the town, planning to like go away. Not 100% sure of the details yet, but she's like planning to go away, and she's thinking about writing a novel about the town. So this is why I say it's metafiction, is because I don't know, I haven't looked into this at all. I don't know like whether Munro is fictionalizing details from her own life, but either way, she's writing about a town which kind of represents her own hometown, her real world hometown, and a young woman growing up in this town. And what Del Jordan does in the book is she fictionalizes a version of a small town. She says, I'm just pulling something up. I'm going to fictionalize a version of the small town that I'm living in. So the character is saying, I'm going to write a novel about a fictional version of Jubilee. And this is very interesting in my opinion, and this is like what I think of this as clear metafiction. So I'm just going to read you a quote. So she writes, for this novel, I had changed Jubilee too, or picked out some features of it and ignored others. It became an older, darker, more decaying town, full of unpainted board fences covered with tattered posters advertising circuses, fall fairs, elections that had long since come and gone. So I just thought it was really cool to end the book with this young woman beginning to think about how she can write the kind of book that we've just finished reading, that we in the real world have just finished reading. There is this other sub-story. I'm not going to get into it, but it's a very interesting sub-story that, her idea for the novel. So yeah, I couldn't recommend this book enough. I don't really reread stuff, but I would definitely reread this. And yeah, I have kind of a cool copy of it. It's the Indigo 25th anniversary edition. If you live in Canada, you can buy this. If you live in the States, I don't know, you could probably order it, but it seems pointless. But it's still nice. And yeah, I guess that's it. Happy reading.